SCP-2238. Broadcasting live from out of time. Object Class: Keter. Previously safe. Special Containment Procedures. Foundation personnel are to monitor all local television broadcasts at all times. If an SCP-2238-A instance is reported to have occurred, Foundation personnel are to record said instance for the purpose of record keeping. Additionally, all civilians involved, footnote 1, observed, recorded, or had any interaction with an instance of SCP-2238-A will be detained by Foundation personnel and released if they are found to have no involvement with the SCP-2238 phenomenon and are to undergo Class A amnestics. Description: SCP-2238 is the official designation of an anomalous phenomenon primarily affecting television broadcast stations in the southern United States, manifesting itself as a series of historical documentaries within the affected area. This phenomenon affects specific time slots within the affected region by hijacking local TV transmitters through a currently unknown method. The main broadcast intrusion occurs during the airing of historical documentaries. The type of documentary that SCP-2238 affects are primarily made by European or American filmmakers, specifically those that focus on the First and Second World War, although it has been reported that SCP-2238 will affect others that do not fall into this category. During an intrusion, SCP-2238 will play a similar documentary to the one being interrupted. This documentary, now known as SCP-2238-A, will have several deviations from the original, such as different events, different historians, and actors used in the documentary. Footnote 2. If said documentary includes dramatization. The amount of deviations from the original vary between each instance of SCP-2238-A. Currently, there are 22 instances of SCP-2238-A. Footnote 3. It is currently unknown how many unrecorded instances of SCP-2238-A there are, some estimates going as far as into the thousands, while more conservative estimates go into the hundreds. The first reported SCP-2238 event was on December 5, 1992, when a civilian reported to a local broadcasting service about the inaccuracies of the documentary Napoleon, Man of Power. Footnote 4. SCP-2238-A-19. In Redacted, Alabama. The documentary discusses the effects of Napoleon Bonaparte's annexation of Russia and over a majority of the Eurasian continent. Addendum 2238 1. Foundation scientists and analysts have compiled a full timeline of events from all 22 instances of SCP-2238-A. 1812. Invasion of Russia by Napoleon I, ending its annexation. The War of 1812 begins. 1813. Napoleon III is installed as the new Tsar of Russia. Closer diplomatic ties between the US government and the new French Empire occur. The Peninsular War ends 1 year earlier in a French victory. 1814. France becomes involved in a war against Great Britain. A 3-year famine occurs in Russia due to an early winter, creating more resentment against the French-installed Russian government. In the same year, the formation of the Party of Russian Nationalists occur. 1815. War of 1812 ends with a US-French victory. Most of the former British Empire is split between the US and France. US annexes Canada, causing it to control most of the fur trade. 1816 to 1820. The US government begins encouraging its citizens to settle Canada. Napoleon I begins conquering most of mainland Europe, dismantling their governments in favor of pro-French ones. The French government starts to kill Russian nationalists and those for an independent Russia. 1821. The French Empire collapses due to the death of Napoleon I via assassination by nationalists during his first visit to Russia. A revolution, referred to as the Russian upheaval, occurs. Napoleon III is killed and replaced with the descendant of Tsar Alexander. 1822 through 1850. Most of Northern and Western Europe experiences a Dark Age due to significant infighting between various factions following the death of Napoleon I. Central and Eastern Europe are divided between pro- and anti-French forces, primarily ending in anti-French victory, further deteriorating the already fracturing French Empire. Southern Europe was primarily affected by this, as the lack of major Austrian and French interference in the region allowed radicals and Italian nationalists to gain power. A new Russian government is created, this time with a system similar to a constitutional democracy. Along the same time, Great Britain experiences great social unrest, with several riots and attempted revolutions. 1850 through 1865. A new government is finally established in France, this time under the control of a queen known as Isabella I, the daughter of an anti-Napoleon general. She re-establishes centralized authority in the mainland of France, creating a dictatorial police state, killing dissenters and radicals. The American Civil War does not change from the original timeline. 1866 through 1911. Isabella I regains control over most of the pre-1812 territorial borders, excluding the Duchy of Warsaw, but her state continues to suffer from radicalism and independence movements. The Russian government undergoes another revolution, this time by Russian communists under the control of Vladimir Lenin and Leon Trotsky. Revolution ends in 1910 with the communist victory. 1912. The House of Commons of Great Britain is attacked by radical communists via improvised explosives. Over 100 members of parliament are killed in the explosion, resulting in a temporary suspension of constitutional rights and annual elections. During this time, the new communist government, now calling itself the Soviet Union, annexes most of the Eastern European states now under French influence. 1913. The creation of the Allied Powers, an alliance between the US, Great Britain, Austrian, and French governments. Its creation was due to the recent territorial expansion from the Soviet government of most of Eastern Europe. 1914 through 1924. This time period, known as the Great War, was a war between the Soviet government and the Allied powers. It began after the assassination of Vladimir Lenin, with Leon Trotsky declaring possible French involvement in Lenin's assassination. By 1914, a small border skirmish between the client state of the Rhine Confederate and the Soviet Union led to another war. The US, UK, and Austria, honoring their agreements with the French, declared war on the Soviets. Following heavy casualties on both sides, the Soviet Union capitulated in 1924 after a victory near what is now modern-day Warsaw. The Treaty of Berlin stated that the Soviet Union would give up most of its territorial gains after 1912, replaced with either French client states or independent countries. In addition, the Soviet Union is forced to pay reparations, either in gold or oil. 1929. An event known as the Great Depression began, causing an economic crash. Due to this event, Isabella II, then Queen of France, desperate for economic wealth, convenes for an update to the Treaty of Berlin with the Allied powers, to the exclusion of the Soviet Union. Austria and Great Britain refused to update the treaty without the inclusion of the Soviet Union, while the US remained officially neutral, still wary over another possible war. Despite repeated claims from the Soviet government that they had sent diplomats to Berlin to discuss updating the treaty, they never arrived, with evidence suggesting a possible French intervention. Isabella II, frustrated with this diplomatic dysfunction, began mobilizing her forces along the Soviet borders, despite objection from her military advisors. 1930. Austria and the UK, wishing to avoid another Great War, attempt to persuade the US to intervene, believing that with a possible four-front war, the French Empire would back down from their threats. The US, still wary of war and suffering from the Great Depression, refused, and remained neutral in the conflict. 1930 through 1945. Isabella II, citing a belief in the supremacy of the French Empire and the inherent necessity of curtailing further attempts at Soviet expansionism, declares war against the Soviet Union. The Second World War, between 1931 and 1937, is at a constant stalemate. There is no full invasion of either country until the US enters the war against the French. In 1939, a full invasion of France begins with the help of the Soviet Union, Great Britain, and Austria. It ends in 1945 with the invasion of Paris, destroying most of the city. 1946. Year of the creation of the United Nations, with the Soviet Union, the US, Austria, and Great Britain as the major leaders of the nations. Little information is known about this world post-1946. Addendum 2238-2. On January 23, 2000, SCP-2238 affected the city of Redacted, Louisiana, broadcasting a documentary entitled How They Hid in the Darkness. Footnote 5, SCP-2238A-23, which describes a X-Class lifted the veil scenario of the Foundation due to increased tensions between the Foundation and the Global Occult Coalition, specifically on an event that occurred December 21, 1991. It also focuses on how the Foundation adapts to a scenario. Due to an error in the BNA pattern recognition system, footnote 6, there is no BPRS failure on this specific date, the Foundation accidentally attacked a GOC base, ending in the death of over 3,000 GOC personnel. This event escalated tensions between the Foundation and the Coalition, causing an event called the GOC Foundation War that lasted 3 years. The contents of the documentary include footage of Foundation agents locating, capturing, and containing several anomalous objects and entities. It includes interviews with Foundation personnel and sapient entities, including an interview with O5-12. The following is an incomplete list of incidents, objects, personnel, and members of GOIs that appear in the documentary. SCP-1892, SCP-1938, SCP-044, SCP-2453, Redacted, Dr. Mann, D2134122, O5-12, SCP-2273, member of GOI 5869, footnote 7, also known as Gamers Against Weed. Object referred to as SCP Redacted, footnote 8, this item has yet to be discovered. Incident 083D, Kondraki, footnote 9, no information on this event exists in Foundation records. Footage of O5-1, 2, 6, 7, and 12 during their first meeting, circa 1912. SCP Redacted. Footnote 10. Documentary claimed that SCP Redacted had been eliminated via redacted methods. Methods of execution for SCP Redacted are still pending approval from the O5 Council. Following this incident, the entire county of Redacted was given Class A amnestics over the course of 5 days, the elimination of all recordings of SCP-2238A-23, and the detainment of over redacted staff members involved in the film. Footnote 11. All released due to a lack of evidence of involvement. All personnel involved with How They Hid in the Darkness deny any involvement with the documentary. Addendum 2238-3. The following is a series of transcripts from the documentary How They Hid in the Darkness. It was early in the morning when I first started hearing the artillery shells. I didn't know they were artillery shells at the time, just knew that something loud was going off. Got up and tried looking through the window. In the distance, this building that I had passed by on my way to work was being burned to the ground. I always thought it was a barracks or a laboratory. If only I knew. Some men dragged me and my daughters out of the house. They say they are with the Coalition, a force trying to keep humanity safe. They tell us to get onto a bus to the nearest civilian safe zone. They take us to one, and they force all the men and women above the age of 15 but not over 50 to come with them. I never saw my daughters again. Survivor of Site 43 raid. Our job was to get the civilians out to the safe zones. Most didn't know what was going on, and the ones that did knew there was no point in trying to keep themselves safe. The case that always sticks out in my mind was this old man near the border of Paris. He refused to leave his house. Lived in it since the Second World War before the communists and Brits invaded. We couldn't get him to move. When the coalition attacked, the house was destroyed and we never found the body. Civilian Protectorates, Paris, France. The reason we used amnestics during the war was because of their tactical usage. Throw in some amnestics in a can into a room filled with enemy combatants and have them all forget who they are for 10 or 20 seconds while you mow them down with your M16. Simplistic, really. Foundation General, Kennedy. They are murderers, is what I think of them. The janitors, all of them, are fucking animals. I thought they were just boogeymen, used to scare some normies and losers on the internet. No. Moscow was my home. Moscow was the only safe place left in Eastern Europe. All others were destroyed in the battles, mostly by nukes and other weapons. I didn't think they had the balls to drop that animal onto us, killing us with its giant scythe, butchering us like insects. Bodies littered the streets. Men, women, children. Of course, the coalition had no choice. What other choice did they even have? Gamers Against Weed member, survivor of Moscow bombing. Europe turned into an absolute hellhole during the first few months. The once spotless meadows were now covered with hundreds of large holes where the bombs and shells dropped, and the larger ones where we dropped the nukes on their sites. You could feel the radiation from up in the air. Made some men so sick that they passed out and crashed their planes. Private of the Foundation Air Force. There was never enough food for us. The coalition forced us to work the farms surrounding the safe zones. They had quotas for what we needed to produce in a season. Each group needed to produce 10 pounds of food from each of the 9 crops they gave us in the span of 9 months. If we didn't produce that much, we were expected to spend 9 months on the front lines in Europe or America. We heard the horror stories. The bombings, the killings. This one guy, a bunkmate of mine, was told that his group didn't produce enough food. We found him in the bathroom. He swallowed his shaving knife. Safe zone, Brazilian resident. Of course we needed to remove them. They were getting in the way with all their rules and regulations. We needed those weapons. The coalition were making their way to Britain and into the Gulf, but no, they said it was too unethical. They were in the way of progress. We had no other choice. We sent in a coalition spy to kill them. Oh, yes, they knew way too much. We couldn't allow an information breach of some sort. 0514 on the disbandment of the Ethics Committee. We first used D-Class. They were monsters, no one would have missed them. But we started to lose more and more, and so we looked for other sources. Coalition POWs, civilians, things like that. The project was more important than any one life. Of course we did. We dropped the infected over their sites and spread it throughout Europe. We had no other choice. Dr. Mann on the use of SCP-008 for biological warfare. We killed him. It was for the greater good of the war. I wish we didn't have to do it, but we did. We rounded up the freaks, greens, blues, reds, anything that looked anomalous and forced them outside. We told them to dig a giant pit. Most of them were no older than 40. After they were done, we threw all the objects in the site into the pit and told them to face the pit. I'm just glad it wasn't me who had to pull the trigger. Coalition soldier, veteran of the raid on Site 19. Thank you for listening to SCP-2238, broadcasting live from Out of Time by Zero Neophyte. If you enjoyed this SCP, please like and subscribe, and follow the link in the description to the SCP Wiki, and vote to support it and the SCP Wiki as a whole.